A villain gets a little more vintage. Here's your look at the Mattel Master Universe Origins Skeletor version 2. Fierce and armored for combat, Skeletor plans to plunder and rule Eternia. This figure stands 5.5 inches tall and has 16 movable joints, so he's highly posable for imaginative and action-oriented fun, masters a universe style. Longtime fans will appreciate the design of Skeletor figure's vintage-style head and full power sword. Before we see what's new with Skeletor here, and I have to admit there's not much, I'd like to first thank, if I can, viewer Open-Ended. Now, he had reached out to me, saw my review of the He-Man version 2, which I'll bring him in a second, and in that review, I think I had mentioned that I didn't have yet the Skeletor. Well, he saw a couple of version 2 Skeletors at his local Walmart, asked if I still needed one, and when I said yes, he took the time and actually sent one my way. A big thank you, sir, because if not for that, I probably would have had to try looking around online to see if I could find one, because local stores didn't seem to turn up much of anything. A big thank you. If you guys would like to check out some of Open-Ended's work, first of all, you can check out his YouTube channel, and second of all, if you want to see some really fantastic figure photography, I'll provide the links to his Instagram account. Again, if you guys want to follow him both on YouTube and on Instagram, I'll provide the links for Open-Ended down below. Again, a big thank you. Now, Skeletor here really is just picking and pulling parts from previous Skeletors. Both He-Man and Skeletor are essentially just the Taco Bell menu items. I know I said that in the He-Man review. Literally just taking parts from other things and just putting it together and giving us a brand new figure. What I mean by that is I'm going to bring in version 1 Skeletor. This was wave 1 Skeletor. This was the Skeletor that everybody picked up. And admittingly, not a lot of people really like the head sculpt that they used for that Skeletor. I'm probably on that list as well. I don't really like the head sculpt. But that Skeletor essentially just uses the same body as the one that we're going to be looking at in this review, or vice versa. It doesn't seem like there's anything really different color-wise. The bodies clearly are the same, and the only thing that's really different is that Skeletor version 2 gets a somewhat new head sculpt. Why I say somewhat new head sculpt is if you were lucky enough to pick up the Battle Armor Skeletor, which I just happen to bring in right now, that Skeletor, like the Battle Armor He-Man, came with 2 different head sculpts. One more of a modern head sculpt, and then one more considered a vintage. Now, it was more closer to being vintage with He-Man than it was with Skeletor. Skeletor basically just got 2 brand new head sculpts. They did essentially take the second head sculpt from this guy, or even didn't pop it off necessarily, and just basically put it on the neck of the new Skeletor version 2. So again, you're not really getting anything new here brought to the table. One other comparison I also wanted to make as well, moving over version 1 Skeletor, I also wanted to bring in this one. This is pretty high on my list of actually my favorite Skeletors of the Master Universe Origins line so far. If you recognize this one, this is the Kronos and Keldor 2-pack. Now, I don't actually have this displayed as Keldor right now because I actually liked the look of the Skeletor head sculpt instead, that a lot of times I just end up displaying him as Skeletor. I think to myself, I don't know 100% the timeline of events, whether they were already working on version 2 Skeletor, packaging him up before the release of the Keldor 2-pack. But I have to ask the question, why didn't Mattel just use the head sculpt that came included with the Keldor set? First of all, not everybody would have picked up that set. Second of all, I think it looks a little more closer to the classic-looking Skeletor than actually just using a head sculpt that came included with the Battle Armor Skeletor. We'll talk more about that in a second. Maybe before doing that, though, let's have a look at the accessories that come included with Skeletor V2. Starting first, not really an accessory necessarily, but he comes included with a comic book entitled Sucker Punch. Now, while you may be thinking He-Man's about to swing and clobber poor Fisto, I have to tell you, no spoilers involved, but it's not actually He-Man. I guess that is really a spoiler. If you have picked up any of the figures featured on the back of the comic book, then you already have this comic. Those ones would be He-Man version 2, Faker, Skeletor version 2, looking at in this review, Fisto, Evil Lyn, a repaint of Evil Lyn, and the LOP Merman. It's actually a good thing I have some of the other figures from this wave, because unfortunately this comic suffered a bit of a corner rippage. I guess there's too much glue or tape inside the plastic when I was trying to cut it, and unfortunately while trying to remove the comic, it ripped the corner right off. I'm not devastated necessarily, because again, I have other comics. I have all the rest of the figures from this wave. If you want to check out the reviews of those, give those a gander. Open-Ended did find this at a local Canadian Walmart. As a resulting of that, unfortunately, there's no word dialogue or anything telling you exactly what's going on story-wise on the inside. You sort of have to leave the idea of your imagination sort of running with the idea of, I guess, looking at the panels, that clearly that's not He-Man. I would hope most people wouldn't be looking at that like thinking, He-Man, you monster. It's not really He-Man, actually, guys. It turns out, in actual fact, it's Faker. One of many Fakers, apparently. Skeletor has a whole army of them. I've considered a similar idea, Skeletor, picking up more than one Faker. Oh, that's the rabbit hole I don't know if I want to travel down. But yeah, it's the same comic as what we got before. Well, worse for wear, but still, put that to the side. Now, the figure does come with one thing that's the samesies from the original Skeletor and one thing that's newsies. Why don't we look at the samesies thing first? The figure comes included with a Havoc staff. The Havoc staff, while I still love the accessory, doesn't look any bit different than the one that we already got before. I'm going to bring in that other one right now. Now, I don't know if it's just my eyes playing tricks on me. You guys can certainly let me know down below in the comments section if you be so kind. But doesn't it look like this Skeletor's Havoc staff is a slightly darker shade of the same purple? Again, is it maybe just me? I don't know. Getting a closer look at the Havoc staffs. I don't know why. Getting the camera to focus in on that. It seems to want to focus really on the Skeletor that's behind it. But bring in the two Havoc staffs so again you can see the difference between the two. There we go. All right, that's better. You can see, yeah, it literally is the same Havoc staff from head to toe, or top of the ram head all the way down to the bottom of the staff. Maybe it's a darker shade of purple. Again, it could just be my old man eyes playing tricks on me. You can let me know down below. Darker purple, just crazy old man. Let me know down below in the comment section. Don't have to call me necessarily a crazy old man. But we're going to go ahead and put that into his hand. He only has really one workable hand for the job. The other hand is a gripping hand. Or I guess more of a grabbing, maiming hand, I guess. We'll call it a maiming hand. You can go ahead and take the Havoc staff and fit it into his hand. And you got Skeletor. The other thing, probably the price of admission, I guess, if you would consider picking up the Skeletor if you already don't have that Wave 1, is the fact he does actually have a double-sided sword. Nice. He-Man version 2 also came included with double-sided sword. If you remember that far back, don't worry, you don't have to. I'm going to bring in the other power sword that came included with the original version 1 Skeletor. This one also suffered from, unfortunately, being a double-sided, or single-sided. You had to attach this to He-Man's power sword, and like the original vintage line, you got yourself the double-sided power sword that way, and then you could unlock the secrets of Castle Grayskull. I like the fact then that it was a nod to the original 80s line, but still I wish that Skeletor could have come included with a double-sided sword. Even if it wasn't something I was going to display Skeletor with at all times, it is nice to be able to have the ability to flip the sword around and not see obnoxious pegs on the back of it. One thing that is a little bit different to it, I'm going to hold the two up so you can see it. It seems like Skeletor's half sword is a little bit longer. Let's just put these close as I possibly can get them to one another. The blade is longer, funny enough, and yet the handle is shorter than the version 2 Skeletor. You can also see as well that Skeletor version 1's power sword, the half variety, also has the guard around the hilt, whereas this power sword doesn't have the handle or the guard on the side. Now you can either, again, fit this into his Skeletor's hands. We're going to go ahead and just remove the Havoc staff for now, and fit this also into his hand, providing I can get that in there. There we go. The sword was also something that came included with Prince Adam, although I've heard that the actual hilt is a little bit smaller in size than the one that came included with Prince Adam. You can also display this on the back of Skeletor, and while he actually doesn't have a designated area on the back of his armor, you can easily then just slide it on the back that way, and if you want to display it instead on the back of Skeletor, then go back to the idea of displaying Skeletor with the Havoc staff instead. Which is kind of usually what I do anyways. I mean, really, if you look at the fact that you already have, say, this guy, we're going to again do comparisons of that in a second. If you already have that Battle Armor Skeletor, essentially the only reason then to pick up this figure is, one, you already don't have this figure here. And two, maybe the fact that, well, I guess you're picking up the figure for the double-sided sword, because that's really the only reason why this figure is different than the other Skeletors we've already gotten. Despite it being really a double dip of the Battle Armor release, I do think that the new head sculpt that they used for the version 2 Skeletor is a considerable improvement over the version 1 that we got before, as I'm freeing up a little bit of space to bring that one in right now. who, again, thought it was a great idea to have Skeletor with a mouth permanently open like this. And while there's things I don't mind about the head sculpt, I don't think I've ever been really crazy about it. Things positively I can say is I like that the outlining of the green of the yellow face on the inside lends well to the original design of the classic head sculpt of Skeletor. That being said, though, the open mouth definitely I find is distracting, and I think it takes too much away from the head sculpt that I think it does improve things better when they use this head sculpt instead. Closed mouth, I think, is the better route to have gone with Skeletor. He doesn't, granted, have the larger red eyes that the original one has, so I think they could have probably found something in the middle. Make the eyes a little bit bigger on this head sculpt, but still keep the mouth closed, like this one has instead. I'm going to move this one out of the way. And again, one other comparison I wanted to make, even though we're not going to bring in the Battle Armor release because it's just essentially the same head sculpt, I did want to, again, bring in this head sculpt. Now, this is the one that came included with the Keldor. I think most of the reasons why people were picking up that Keldor Cronus set in the first place was to get the Keldor and the swappable head sculpt of Skeletor. Now, again, if you look at the two, I feel like this is a much better looking nod, if anything, to the original vintage Skeletor. The skeletal structure of his face, first of all, the fact it does have the additional green outlining the yellow face. Yeah, maybe go away with the idea of not using the ruby stone centers for the eyes. But if they had painted that in just in red, kept the teeth the same way, I think it actually would have made better use to use this head sculpt for the version 2 Skeletor body than actually just reusing the one that we get with the Battle Armor release. Again, I can't keep this as a permanent fixture for a go-to Skeletor simply just because it's going with the darker colors. And of course, this being the green across that bat chest emblem. I still wish that I could have used this head sculpt on this Skeletor's body. But you can already see the difference that would the cause that would have, the problems I would certainly have using this head sculpt, because the head sculpt uses a darker color purple and it would not work well with this body. Just in case you wanted to see what it looked like though, I mean, I was certainly curious, and I did try this the first time I got version 2 Skeletor. I'm going to go ahead and pop the head off. I might have even done this as well when we looked at the Keldor body. I'm just going to remove the head sculpt that comes included with the version 2 Skeletor. For some reason, it's a little bit harder. There we go, remove it. And we're just going to put on the alternate head sculpt that came included with Keldor, just so you guys can see what it looks like. Doesn't that look a little bit more like vintage Skeletor? But yet, again, you can't really use it because the darker purple definitely doesn't look and match with the rest of the purple they use for the rest of his body. I mean, I'm almost even tempted to go in there and paint this to match the coloring of this purple, but I'm not going to be able to match the two. But again, just one last time, I'm going to bring in the version 2 Skeletor, which again, essentially is just a Battle Armor release Skeletor head sculpt. Doesn't this one look a lot better? It may look like it's a similar head, but you can see that the cheek definition on version 2 Skeletor is a little bit more stronger. The face, the cheek area here, for example, is a little softer, a little rounder. It's a lot sharper here in the version 2. But yeah, I mean, I would definitely have gone with this head sculpt instead. I'm not faulting necessarily the fact that they used with this head sculpt, because I still think it's a considerable improvement over the version 1 release. Let's go ahead and just pop that back into place. Maybe down the road we may get ourselves a Skeletor version 3. Watch it happen too as well, where they maybe end up using this head sculpt after all. But it's certainly something to consider. Why did they use this head sculpt instead? I mean, that looks a lot more like vintage looking Skeletor. Okay, that's my rant aside. Let's have a look at the rest of the body now. Now, the body is going to be identical to that Skeletor body. Let's go ahead and grab the Skeletor version 1. Again, I know we spent a little bit of time already talking about it. The armor is exactly the same. I don't think the purple is changed at all. The coloring of the skin also seems to be identical. You're pretty much getting mirror copied bodies. I would not be too far to believe that they didn't just simply use the bodies they already have. Probably they printed off several of these, and they just didn't decide, hey, let's just start swapping out the head sculpts, because basically that's what they've ended up doing here. Move that one out of the way. Let's have a look at the figure's articulation. Now, it's going to be the same as the other Skeletors and really all the other Master Universe figures as well. The head rotates all the way around. It moves up, it moves down, and you can also rock it back and forth as well. As for the shoulders come out. Again, you can get that 90-degree angle bend. You can rotate the arms, of course, all the way around. You don't have to worry as much that that additional part of his armor sticks up over his shoulders. It's a soft enough plastic that you can easily still rotate the arms all the way around. He has a swivel at the elbow, hinges also at the elbow, and you can also rotate the hand all the way around. Hinges there as well. Standard waist swivel, legs split out on a ball joint after all, forward and back. Has a bend at the knee. You can rotate the lower leg. You can also rotate the boot. And you can also hinge the feet back and forth and also ankle pivot them as well. Just in case you're also curious, there's pegals on the undersides of his feet. Now again, if you wanted to get these figures, I don't know if anybody really does this, but if you wanted to bend the knees, you can get them also in the more vintage squatted poses, if you want to have them displayed like that. And one last thing that we can also compare as well. Let's get Skeletor to stand a little bit better. There's version 2 Skeletor. Get his legs bent. There we go. And let's also bring in version 2 He-Man. Again, in both the cases, they're reusing just essentially the same bodies as version 1 He-Man, version 1 Skeletor. And while He-Man definitely looks a lot more like his 80s counterpart, Skeletor takes a bit of a detour. Still, I don't know, I would have gone with this head sculpt myself instead for a version 2 Skeletor, because I think it looks a lot more like the 80s version Skeletor. But I still think that Mattel improved upon that original release of Skeletor, giving us a much better head sculpt than that open mouth. I never really liked the open mouth idea of version 1 Skeletor. So for that reason, if you didn't get a chance to pick up the version 1 Skeletor and you still wanted Skeletor as part of your collection, being also that this one's circulated a little bit more now as well, I would definitely recommend picking up the version 2 Skeletor, even though, yeah, it's just reusing the same parts as previous Skeletors we got before. At the very least, it is an improvement over that version 1 Skeletor. Skeletor version 2 may not appeal to all the Masters of the Universe Origins collectors out there. After all, you're probably going to be checking off the boxes. Well, I already have the body of this figure, and I already have the head sculpt that came included with this, and you're pretty much ultimately just leaving behind a full power sword. That's the only thing that really separates this Skeletor from the version 1 release. Granted, yes, it's a different head sculpt, and still you get that Havoc staff. So for those that are now only getting into the Master Universe Origins collecting, I would recommend getting the version 2 Skeletor, because I think you get a better looking Skeletor, especially with the head sculpt, than what we got with that dismal looking Skeletor from version 1. Ironically enough, you probably could still find that version 1 Skeletor kicking around on a lot of store shelf pegs. But this Skeletor does lend well to the new collectors of the line out there. Longtime collectors, again, you're probably going to be looking at this figure. Well, I already have the body from the version 1 Skeletor. Again, I already have that head sculpt from the Battle Armor release, that if I didn't like the head sculpt, I could easily just use, the one that came with the Battle Armor release. I already have the Havoc staff. The only thing that's really different that you can't check off is that this one has the full power sword. He-Man, you can make the valid argument that He-Man, for me at least, having the full power sword, that was the reasoning why I wanted to get the version 2 He-Man. But Skeletor, if you don't decide to display him anyways with the power sword, and you display him instead with the Havoc staff, you're probably just going to pass on this figure altogether. I like at least that Mattel gave you the option out there to give you a different looking Skeletor. But for longtime collectors, we already have a lot of these component pieces anyways. We could ultimately just build this looking Skeletor anyways, using the parts from previous figures we already have from the previous waves. The only thing that's really the deal breaker is the fact he has the full power sword. Is that enough to buy a brand new figure of Skeletor? Some people would say yes. Some people would say no. At the end of the day, it's still a nice looking Skeletor, but it's reusing so many of the parts that we already have from previous releases. I guess if you never picked up the Battle Armor release, then there's more reasons to push you towards getting the version 2 Skeletor. If you already have the Battle Armor Skeletor, again, you already have this head sculpt in your repertoire anyways. I still think, though, that Mattel missed the point, or dropped the ball, that they didn't end up using the head sculpt that came included with the Keldor, because I think it's a better looking Skeletor head, and it looks closer to being the 80s version Skeletor than the one that they actually used from the Battle Armor release. You agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Let me know down below in the comments section. Once again, though, I'd like to thank viewer Open-Ended, who actually took the time and picked this up for me. I was really looking, I just finished getting the He-Man version 2, and I kept saying to myself, do I want to get the version 2 Skeletor? Do I want to get that? I knew ultimately I was still going to be going out of my way to find one. Open-End did find one, and took the time and sent one my way. Thank you very much for that. If you guys are new to this channel, enjoying the content you're seeing, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. Turn the bell notification on and make sure that, yes, you're coming back, because we will be looking at more Masters of the Universe Origins figure reviews coming your way in the not-so-distant future. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.